Hi, I'm Pamela Poole, and I live an amazing life as an artist and an author. Today's amazing because I'm in the studio. I'm not painting. I'm actually getting ready to tell you a little bit more in the Inspired Art Appreciation series about another artist in history. This one is an American painter born in 1882. His name is N.C. Wyeth. He was born in Massachusetts. He grew up on a farm, which you may think is an unlikely place for an artist to be brought up and nurtured. But actually, the things that he learned about the hard work, the weather conditions, the elements, man confronting nature, the animals, and everything that he cared for, all those challenges and things like body mass in the motions of the hard work, things like expression, and other things from when people would exert themselves in labor, those actually became a terrific foundation for him later in his book characters when he was illustrating books. He illustrated 112 books in his time, and he also did 3,000 paintings, so he was quite prolific. He grew up with three brothers, and he actually was very close to them all of his life. He ended up using them when they would visit as models in his studio. Sometimes if you look at some of his paintings and you think, wow, that looks like maybe the author used himself as a model, it might have been a familiar look because it was one of his brothers. And he loved to use props. So he would dress people up and they became the characters that he was illustrating in his studio. If you go to my Pinterest board at Pamela Poole Art on Pinterest, you will notice there's one row that has Robert Louis Stevenson, Howard Pyle, N.C. Wyeth, and maybe something like famous artists and authors. There's a row that will have his board. This is it pulled up. On this particular board, there's a photo of him in his studio, and he actually has a character, and you'd have to look up the history of that photo. I'm not sure if it's one of his brothers or someone else, but he has a model dressed in cowboy attire, in a pose that Wyeth wanted for a character that is all set and ready. He's in a saddle and everything else. It looks very authentic. So he learned that from Howard Pyle, his art instructor. After he left the farm, after high school years, his mother influenced his dad to let him go to art school. And there, of course, he thrived, and that's when he became very influential in the art world here in America. And he sold his first painting to Saturday Evening Post, which we learned about in the Norman Rockwell video before this one. The Saturday Evening Post bought a painting of a bronco busting cowboy for $50 in 1903. And that translates to today being $1,466. So he did pretty good for an art student, maybe still in school or fresh out of school. His mentor and instructor, Howard Pyle, also taught them that not only should they know their subject matter firsthand to have an emotional impact and to be authentic, but also that they should paint things that are meaningful, that have American traditional values in them. And so that was instilled into N.C. Wyeth. He got magazine sponsorships right out of school and traveled out west. This would have been in the turn of the century, 1900s. And while he was there, he did get a lot of work done, but while he was there, the money that he was to come back east with was stolen by Mexican bandits in a raid. And so he had to remain there and work for about a year, very grueling work in bad conditions to gain back the money that he needed to get back home to a fiance, because he was going to later become married to her. And also, another thing that shows up from this trip is that when he illustrated a lot of books, he did some American scenes of Indians or cowboys or cattle, horses from those experiences that he learned when he went out west. So it was a very fruitful experience for him, even if adventurous and maybe a little frightening. It turned out to be something that it paid off a lot in his later life. One of the things that I really like about N.C. Wyeth's work, him and his mentor and instructor, Howard Pyle, who we will probably do next in this series, they were great at using something I call still space. And that is the space in a painting that is pretty, it's useful, but it actually is empty as far as capturing your attention first. It helps set the stage and draw your attention to the character and the emotional element that the artist is trying to get. And in illustration, that was something that N.C. Wyeth knew very well. The emotional impact on the reader for that book was going to be a powerful component of reading that story, something unforgettable that the reader would take away with them. Sometimes that still space could be used for a book plate or a caption. It could become a poster, and so it was useful in that way as well. But mostly the usefulness for the still space, the quiet space, some people call it white space, blank space, but in my lessons I always call it still space when I'm teaching students. That is useful as a setting to let the viewer rest and focus on the main part of the painting. This is an example of that. This is another out west painting, and the sky is gorgeous. You probably can't see the transitions of color that I can see firsthand. It is on the Pinterest board that I mentioned earlier, so if you want to look into that, go to that page and it's on there. That sky is beautiful if you just look at it on your own, maybe cover up the bottom, but the bottom of this is the main point, the wagon train, and getting you to empathize with the struggles and the loss, the need to survive out west, that settlers that first went out west to settle that territory for us, the things that they would have experienced. So that was a very good hook for him to have used for readers of that book. Now, one of the ways that I first learned about N.C. Wyeth was because I love classic books. Honestly, when I get tired of modern fiction, it definitely departs from the values that were taught and valued in the early part of the 20th century and on through most of the 20th century of ethics, hard work, watch your language, you don't have to curse to be relevant, and all of that sort of thing. Heroes don't have to have a lot of bad morals, it's okay to be good. When I get tired of all the junk in today's entertainment, I'll go back to a classic. One of my always go-to books is going to be Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island. And that is what this illustration was for. When N.C. Wyeth landed this work in 1911, he told a friend that the gods had smiled on him. This was like a fantastic job for him. He was one of those people that really empathized with a character. He really got into a role, similar to the way an actor would get into a role. One quote that I read from him was when he was illustrating a book that had these Vikings and stuff in it, he actually went up to bed kind of stumbling, he's tired after a day in the studio. He sort of stumbled upstairs and kind of ducked because he still envisioned himself with the helmet on that was on the character that he was painting. And he wasn't wearing a helmet himself, but I've wondered about that sometimes with actors. Perhaps you theater people know how this works, but after playing a role and just getting it into your system for so long, how do you come back to being yourself after you put so much of yourself into a role? That was something that he did beautifully, and it was the reason that he was so successful with his paintings. Another one, I'm thumbing through a book here to kind of capture some things for you. Another one that I really like was Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe. And in this, N.C. Wyeth uses still space beautifully and light and dark beautifully to frame the main character, Robinson Crusoe, who is reading the Bible and actually coming to faith after being marooned on a deserted island. He has to figure out how to survive, and part of that is becoming a Christian and that sort of thing. Those were things that used to be common and virtuous subjects that people enjoyed. These days, some would probably do a review and call it preachy and all kinds of things. Put it in the time context. Before you criticize an author like Daniel Defoe or artists who depicted virtuous things, remember the time that they lived in. They were speaking to a whole different audience than what we have here in 2020. Animal lovers, you probably recognize this one. This is from The Yearling. And again, he uses light, dark, and still space for a powerful punch of emotional impact. One of my favorite books growing up was Heidi. Those of you old enough to remember what Heidi is, you might remember this illustration as well in an older copy you had, perhaps. N.C. Wyeth did this one. He also liked to do paintings, just, landscapes and nature. He was very much into nature and naturalism. But some of his best work for me were what you would call his illustrations. And some of that, I'm patriotic. I like to study the founding fathers, the historic time periods, especially here in America. And I actually, if my family history is correct, I have an ancestor who would have made a wagon trail trip with Daniel Boone's son. This is Daniel Boone. In America, we love to honor our heroes that sacrifice so much for a dream of establishing our country. This is one of the ultimate and our first president, George Washington. He has some amazing true stories about his life that are difficult for some people to believe, and yet they are recorded as being real. The bulletproof George Washington and all sorts of miraculous things he came through. This is another one that I love. This is John Paul Jones. And the reason that I thrill to this painting is that there's a sense of immediate action. Something is getting ready to happen. Yes, there is a lot of devastation all around John Paul Jones, but as a leader, he is not backing down. He is moving forward and charging ahead to be victorious. So this is another historic figure from our times here in America. We have a beautiful history, just so courageous. This is another one that later became I think a reading promotion poster or something. This still space, all this sky, it is fascinating in and of itself, but it does not take your attention away from the main subject, which is the ships here. This is the discovery by Columbus as well. And all that still space could also leave places for words, which I think is actually what ended up happening when this became a poster. They turned some of that still space into a place to put titles and promotions and that sort of thing. And this is actually the picture of Columbus as he depicts him when he is setting out for landing and finding the new world. So I wanted to end this with encouragement to go and find out more about N.C. Wyeth. And I hope that when you look at his works and when you think about the books that he has illustrated, you will remember that American classics from that time period honored virtues rather than, we didn't make our heroes, we kept them realistic, but we didn't come up with some sort of fault that they had to have to make them realistic or acceptable or more like us. We let heroes be heroes back then. And that, I believe that's another reason that I like these early American illustrators so much. And next time we're going to talk about Howard Pyle, another another artist who was in the series and who greatly influenced Norman Rockwell from our last video, and who was the instructor and influence for NC Wyeth as well. So join us next time. Today I'm going to say goodbye. I hope you have a wonderful creative life. Bye-bye.